Okay. Quick, do the millennial pause. Hey, everybody. So, anyway, hey, everyone. Welcome back to Coaches on the Couch, episode 9. I think this is just the thing now. I just don't look up and I forget. Anyway, it's a little bit later than even when I said it was. I posted. I was like, oh, we'll do it yesterday, which was Wednesday, and then just did not do it. If I'm honest, I ended up watching SECs and ACCs instead of filming this video. So, yeah, we did it. We made it through conference.
Yay!
Bye-bye. So, yeah, conference was last weekend. I figured we would do kind of a different approach. We do 2 videos. Yeah. This will be kind of our initial reactions to how we did and thoughts coming out of the meet. And then next week, we can do a little bit deeper dive, maybe highlighting certain swims or certain trends that we saw, digging into the data a little bit more. Yeah. So, yeah. So, you want to start? What'd you think?
Sure. It was fun. I think we did really well. You know, I know our preseason polls, right? Kind of men's team was pretty accurate, but I feel like we were still closer than maybe I was expecting to a team that was almost double their size, or is double their size. So that was pretty cool and exciting. And then our women finishing 5th was just pretty epic. It's the highest we've been in quite some time, if I remember you saying correctly. And yeah, it was just fun. It was great to see. You know, this was just a lot of fun. It felt really emotional with the senior class this year because, you know, that was my first year.
Yeah, I was going to say, this year finally through a full cycle.
Yeah, full cycle. So it was like just really exciting, and I was just really proud to watch our team swim and show up and work hard. So
yeah, I mean, echo similar things. Yeah, so preseason poll, women were picked to finish 6th. Men were picked to finish 8th. I think I flip-flopped. Or I think I picked like both of that. Our women and women were supposed to finish 8th. I don't know where I got that from, but I definitely remember telling Natalie that. I was like, yeah, we were picked to finish 8th, and look how high we are. And I don't know where I got that. Anyway, maybe in years past, right? I think that has been a thing in years past where we're like, oh, we're projected to finish. The women are projected to finish 8th. I'm like, do you even look at talent on roster? But that's fine. Yeah. So the women finished 5th, which is the highest finish since 2008. When they finished 5th there, I believe, and then in 2004 they finished 3rd, and in 2001 they finished 4th. So that's since the turn of the century, we've only finished in the top 5 4 times, and I know, like, up until recently, most of that has still been like, well, you're still even finishing 5th is still you could say the top of the middle of the conference or whatnot. I mean, like, if you look at the results, there's a huge gap to, say, Whitworth, Whitman, and then UPS was pretty solidly 3rd. Linfield was about 50 points ahead of us, I think. And then, but we were, almost 100 plus points clear of PLU on the women's side. So I think that's a great trend. They scored 10 more points than last year, which is overall, if you're looking at a 2-year bump, it's about almost 70 points clear from where they were 2 years ago. Yeah, again, finishing 5th, which is a great accomplishment. Normally we're 6th, 7th, honestly, and so that's been awesome. The men had no right being in 7th if you just look at straight up points on the psych sheet. They had no business being in 7th all the way until literally the 200 fly, which was the last individual race. Because we did beat George Fox in the relay, so we clawed back a couple points. But yeah, they were up 12. I said I wasn't going to go into numbers, but this just sticks in my head. We were up 12 going into the 2 fly. Fox had 1 up, 2 down. For those of you who have no idea what that means they had 1 in the championship final, so up, and 2 in the consolation final, down. And they came out plus 18 of that from us. And so we went down 6, and then in the relay we beat them, so we went plus 2, so ultimately finished 8th by 4. Yeah, definitely overswam our seeds. Yeah. And it was tough too. Like, I think one of the big shocks and one of my first reactions is, wow, conference has gotten really fast even from last year, right? Like, we had people who didn't score this year who would have scored last year with their times. And so I think that's a big trend, is that the conference is getting faster, not just in any particular event, but just overall. And, I think that speaks to the quality of of other coaches bringing in really good talent, but also us developing talent as well. I mean, that was kind of my big thing is like, I felt, well, using the first full day, so technically day 2 as a kind of a barometer, I'll be honest, I thought the 500s were, in comparison, a slower event, as in it was still kind of like similar to last year.
Yeah.
And kind of even with the 200 IMs, and then you get to the 50 frees for the men, for example, and it took a 21.7 to get in.
Yeah.
Which in previous years you could go a 21 high to maybe even 22 low and get in. We had 4 guys go 20 point this year out of the conference, and before we only had 2, I think, last year.
Yeah.
On the women's 50, it was definitely competitive. It took a little bit faster to get in. But then day 3, so Saturday, when the 100's a stroke, the 400 and 2 free, and it's like, that's where it was like, oh my goodness, yes, the conference is so much faster. And it's interesting, you know, talking with other coaches, it's like, do we think it took a day and a half to settle in, right? Because if you didn't swim Thursday, which only, at most, if you have completely 2 different relays, at most you're swimming 8 per side. So at most 16 swimmers get to go on that first day, right?
Yeah.
So Friday is really the first full day for everybody, and there's jitters. And I talked pretty extensively with a couple coaches of like, how do you normalize and desensitize almost this meet without not giving it its respect.
Yeah.
Right. We talked about like, you know, why is it different from mid-season and all that. And it's something, you know, for me that I really want to try to figure out how to be better is we seemingly are so loose at Bruin. And I don't know if that's because we know most of us have second swim. So it's okay if we experiment a little or we're a little off versus having to earn your spot and that additional pressure of earning your spot. So would going to Lager be a better option? Would going to somewhere like Laverne Invite be a better option? But it's like, you look at Laverne, for example, and our top people would barely be scraping back at that meet. Like, it's so fast. And so just something to think about. And I'm, again, not saying that our swimmers did anything wrong by any means. I think it's just we as a coaching staff need to figure out how can we prep them to be able to perform in the morning on Friday.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the big thing for me.
I think also, like, you know, I talked to a couple of distance swimmers that were on that free relay, and they're like, well, I've already had my first swim. And it's hard to compare a relay to an individual race, right? Like, there are 3 other people with you in that situation that can be that support. And then when you step up to your first individual race and you have to go 20 laps as fast as you possibly can, it's like, that's such a different beast. And so, like, acknowledging that, like, yes, I've gotten my first technical race out of the way, but this is my first individual race. I also think, like, there's so much pressure around the meet because it's like, oh, I'm rested, I've shaved, I've got a suit on.
I've got a new suit on.
Which we can argue, and he'll get on a soapbox about the suits the whole time. You know, and I agree, like, we're talking 0.00 something into your time and realistic physics of it, right? But just kind of letting go. Like, sometimes I feel I did it, right? You hold on too tightly to this end thing, and it's like, it's the end. And it's like, well, unless you're, you know, and even then some seniors will go on and swim masters, like, unless it's really, really your last meet ever, it's not the end. This is just another step in the road of continuum for it. And so I think learning to let go of something so deeply, and it's hard when you care about it, but like figuring out how we can be like, let go, relax.
Yeah.
Like,
or not even let go, but just, like you said, understanding that it is a balance between the gravity of the meet versus, like, you've done this how many times. And we try to talk about that. There's a Star Wars clip I use that they, I think, enjoy watching. At least they enjoy that it's come up from Return of the Empire Strikes Back, excuse me. I mean, yes, and I mean, yes, I don't think I do think suits help, like, to clarify my stance on suits. I do think suits help. I don't think suits are as magical as some people make them out to be. Yes, they float you differently, but that's also a challenge because you're floating differently. Now your body's going to sit differently in the water, and you have to figure out how to respond to that. And so I am a big proponent of using suits more often than we do, with understanding that they're expensive. Not everybody has access to multiple suits, and not everybody wants to wear a suit, because now we're getting into the mental side of it. And I think the suit can be unlock trigger for some people, and I'm not using trigger in a bad word here, but can be the unlocking mechanism trigger that propels them to great swims, because it's just a confidence thing at that point.
Yeah, the cape.
Yeah, right? And the cape. And so it's like Superman is still Superman without his cape, right? And so it's like Wonder Woman is still Wonder Woman without her lasso. And that's making DC references when I'm normally a Marvel guy. But Cap is still Cap without his shield. And so it's like, yeah, how do we do that? Like, you're still a great swimmer with or without the suit.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that one of our coaching friends has done a lot of work with their team down in Southern California about confidence, and definitely picking their brain. But yeah. Going back to other reactions from the meet, for me, I think it's another thing to think about is, like, over a 4-day span, how do you balance the energy needs on that last day, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're looking at, now, granted, in the moment, I am one of the worst people, I feel like, to talk to about how I think we're doing, because I know I zoom in way too much on some things, and it takes people talking to me to be able to, don't side-eye shake your head, I saw that. It takes people talking to me, and usually not in the moment, for me. So, like, one thing I was talking about, I think I mentioned to you, I'm sure I did, I was just like, we seem so tired compared to some other teams. And I'm just like, what is going on? And then we get to finals, and you realize, I think you said it, right? We had, or maybe you and Gloria both said it. It's like, we had a woman in every A final.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy. And, like, obviously, like, you can still be tired, but we still put people in A finals. And, I think, again, I said I wasn't going to get too much into numbers, but going back with Linfield, outside of that first day, we were right there with them. Like, Linfield's top end talent is super good. Christy Kepo won, 2 events?
2 events.
That's 40 points right there. And they were really strong in some events we were weak in this year. That was one thing I know from the 2 fly. We had 1 up, they had 1 up, 2 down, I think. Or maybe even 2 up, 2 down. The 400 IM, we didn't have anybody. Christy won that. Or did Christy win that? Or did Bella win that? Regardless, Christy was the top 3. And I think they had another 1 or 2 in the B final. And the 500, Christy won that. And Jillian won the console heat, which was great. But it still, again, just points, I think, spread across a handful of events, kind of what did us in with it. And their relay stepped up too. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we're talking a handful of points there, because they didn't win a relay to really shift the dynamic with us. But every point counts when you're looking at a team battle. But yeah, I realized, talking a lot about the women, I think for the men, the big surprise was Cole finished second in the 100 backstroke.
What a race.
Like, what a race. Definitely thought he DQ'd on his start.
Yeah.
I mean, his nose came up.
I don't think we were breathing.
Right in between the 2 buoys that marked the 15 meter. And I was like, I hope the judges think his forehead broke before that. And so, that was probably the swim of the meet for me. Like, when I'm just like, if you're to quit, it'd be that or Kyle Lopez 100 breast.
Yeah.
Or actually, I would actually say his 2 breast was more gutsy. His 100 breast was like, we kind of expected he'd have a good 100 breast, just what we saw at Bruin and what we saw at just leading up to it. But the 2 was such an unknown, and he breaks 210 for the first time. He went out and just kind of dominated the console heat.
Yeah.
So
especially, like, to go best time in prelims and then to be like, I want more. Like, he really gutted that swim.
Yeah.
It was epic.
Yeah.
Especially on the last day. Like, doing a 200 on the last day is hard.
Yeah, and then getting up for that 4 free relay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, yeah, the men swam really well. I feel like that's kind of been the story of the whole season, is like, the men, because they're so small, that it's really been we talk about individual effort, but I think conference was finally a very good opportunity to see, like, hey, yeah, like, we might be small, but we can go in and put points on the board and do a good job. So
they really definitely embodied grit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had 5 men who contributed points to the conference race, as 50% of the guys are contributing to the race, or to the team race. For the women, it was 13, which was an upping from last year. Yeah, a bunch of new top 10 times, 2 new school records. Shout out Tessa Chiatti for her 100 fly and 200 fly. The 200 fly takes down Alicia Potter's 1994 record, so a 31-year-old record. Her 100 fly took down Kylie Lynn, which was from 2018, so not quite as old, but still 7 years. It's a long time to be up there. Kylie was texting me and was like, "That's awesome that Tessa broke it, and she's gonna do such a good job." So I think that was really cool to see. Paying attention. And I think, it's funny, that actually sparked another conversation. I don't remember who I was talking to, but they were like, do you tell the record holders when their record goes down? And I said, I do if I know them, and especially if I coach them. And I don't do that from like a, hey, like, ha, your record's gone, but it's more like a, hey, like you had set a standard for however long, and I want you to know that someone else has come along to up that, right? And they did that because of your, like, where you got it to.
Yeah.
And so I that's why I talk to the record holders. It's not to say like, oh, isn't it a bummer your name came down? But it's more like a, hey, like, look at what you helped propel somebody else to. It was funny. I was talking with Derek Ludwig last night. He was our former 100 fly record holder before Cole came along, and he took Steve Koga's name off the board, which at the time was like a 40-year-old record.
Yeah.
It was the oldest record on the board. Steve still holds the 2 oldest records on the board, but with Cole's swims in the 100 fly this weekend, Derek and Cole have now taken Steve completely off the top 10, which is wild to me.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's crazy.
So
yeah, it was a good one.
Yeah, it was a fun meet. It was definitely long. It was hectic. I think the last thing maybe for this video, from me at least, aside from, I think the women, like, athletically, I'll say one more thing athletically, you can talk, and then I have one other thing to kind of close it. So athletically, where are we at, right? Like, where do I think we are coming forward? I think we're in an interesting place with both teams. The women's graduating class has been incredibly impactful, and they developed over their time here, and so that's been exciting, right? Like the ability to develop them into 5 of the 7 were scoring in some sort of A final, and I think that talent and their growth has allowed us to grow the team underneath them. For me, it's a very scary thought of like, what are we going to do without those points next year? Because the last 2 years, I haven't looked at this year yet, the last 2 years, they have been like 2/3 or more of the scoring points at conference.
Yeah.
Now, I think, again, you could look at that as you've had to rely on them versus like they're that talented and that good. Yeah. And again, most of it was fully developed here, which is great. And I think that's something we can pat ourselves on the back on. But yeah, so for the women's team, that's where I'm at. And then really quickly with the men, again, we're graduating Cole, best flyer to come through ever, second best backstroker, 200. He has a 200 IM record. He can sprint. He had a 2 fly record. Ethan right now is on track to go onto the 3-2 program for engineering, so it's a big loss in the IM and the mid-distance to distance group. But right now, I think the men are in a good spot. They're hungry to be better. They're definitely all in with recruiting. It seems like we've got a good class of 3 so far, with many more still interested. So hopefully we can get a good class. So I feel like the men are now on this precipice of building momentum, and the women, it's like, how do we maintain while still building?
Yeah,
so.
And it'll be the first time we're graduating a significant number of people. That's where my brain is at. It's like, now we've moved away from the pyramid. We are now much more squarely a square. And so, like, we're graduating larger and larger numbers in terms of, like, oh, yeah, like, we're actual chunks of team, and that's new.
Yeah,
at least for me.
For you, yeah. I was just going to say, actually, as you say that, I'm like, well, the class
I came post-COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the class of 2020 was 5 men and 3 women. And it kind of a similar situation now I think about it. Like, the women were the 3 women that we graduated. Nikki Cates, one's a record holder. Jensen Rasmussen. Although you going by Ludwig now is your last name, Jensen? Jensen's got married to Derek. Jensen was a B finalist for us. And then on the men's side, Derek Ludwig, Alex Hogan, Ben Hedman, all record holders. Colin Hakeman was a conference finalist, and Jacob Holte contributed on relays. And so it's like, I guess it's a very similar situation, just a flip, but because it's been 5 years, I guess I'm not equating it in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's new for me, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. So
we've only been graduating classes of like 3 and 4.
we've been graduating very small classes. Yeah, you're right. The pyramid is gone. We are now more of a square,
rectangle,
whatever you want to call it. So,
or if you're Maddie, Corey, it's both.
Yeah, Maddie, let us know. Is it a square rectangle or is a rectangle a square? Anyway, so the final thing I wanted to say, just my initial thoughts, is that we have the best parent group in the conference.
Yeah.
And of course I'm biased in saying that, but I see other parents in the stands, and no doubt that those parents are passionate about their team and their swimmer. But we don't really get to see what they do outside of that. And I know, at least in my talkings with other coaches, it seems like they're not as involved as our team is. And I think part of that is us asking them to be involved and allowing them to be involved. And I think part of it is it's just what we do. Yeah. And so, to specifically to Stuart and Carrie, thank you once again for hosting us and organizing everything. To Janae for helping organize, Julie. I'm trying to think of all the other people who I need to thank. There's way too many. So to all of our parents who hopefully are watching, just as thank you for being around. Definitely appreciate it. And I think that's something that I would encourage other coaches to really take advantage of. Is like, your parents want to be involved. They want to be there. I understand the wanting to control, like, what time your kid goes to bed and all that. And I think, don't get me wrong, that stresses me out a little bit at conference too. But I also think, like, that's a learning thing. They got to learn that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
at some point, they have to own that responsibility.
Yeah, they're adults, even though sometimes I'm like, they're not adults. They're adults. But
Time
it's like
to start treating them like such, right? Like, they're not going to learn unless we allow it.
Yeah, and I do think that the parents who come understand the importance that this meet holds to their swimmer, and but yeah, it's just great having the parents around. I mean,
they also take care of us.
Yeah, right. Like, shout out Ellen and Charlene for the
coffee,
the caffeine runs, and just fantastic. So so again, parents, thank you. To any coach who might happen across this, if you're not involving your parents early, I think you're missing out. Not just from your athlete being comfortable side, but just letting your athlete and their parents celebrate the meet, like conference. And don't even get me wrong, like on the whole season, but like celebrating conference, right? Like, yes, you may have been their coach for the last year or 2, 3, 4 years, but before they got to you, they had their parents. And I think that is something to not forget, is that parents are so heavily involved, and then they get to college and they're going to be less involved just because they're not at home anymore. And so anytime you can have them be involved, they just, at least in my experience, like, parents want to be involved, and they only want to be involved in a positive way. Knock on wood, we have not had parents that, want to be coaching their kid and overriding what the coaches say or anything like that. They've always been great. So senior parents, if you're watching this, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hopefully see you at graduation. To all the other parents, great to see you. Thank you as well for everything you did. I guess we'll cut that off here and kind of, next week go into a little bit of a deeper dive from the numbers perspective. So, mentioning the top 10s, again, looking at Tessa's records, our trend, I think, for the men and women, where we're headed, where we're going, and maybe any other digital, or not digital, but any other data stuff that comes to my mind in the next week or so. So not saying that that'll be out on Monday, considering this is Thursday, but sometime next week we'll film another one of these. And then we'll talk about also, like, what the plan is moving forward from there. Because I think, thinking about this probably won't be weekly moving forward out of next week, but definitely want to still keep this going, because I do think people will watch it and enjoy it. And it's a little peek behind the curtain too, right? Like, I had a few parents say that, like, it's interesting to hear your thought processes on things. And I've talked to the few recruits who have watched these things as well. So just an opportunity to learn us. But I think one thing would be bringing swimmers on and doing more of couch interviews, and maybe they'd feel awkward sitting next to us like this, but we'll sit them right here in the middle.
Right in the middle, the little tiny space.
So, anyway, again, thanks for following along. We'll kind of wrap it up here and say, what a year. We made it through, and now we'll take some time to decompress and start with some lessons and all that. But Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.